They slammed my father's cousin Timothy face first into his own fence post, cuffs biting his wrists, while Karen Whitfield smiled from her porch. "That's what happens when you don't respect this board," she said, sipping sweet tea like she'd ordered dessert instead of a beating. I filmed every second of it on my phone, hands shaking, heart pounding, knowing this footage would end her reign forever. My name is Daniel Reyes, and this is the story of how one tyrant destroyed a farmer's peace, and how the law destroyed her. 6 months earlier, none of us knew Karen Whitfield's name would become a byword for cruelty in Willow Creek Estates. I'd bought my 3 acres to grow vegetables, raise chickens, and finally give my daughter Mia a real backyard to run in. Timothy, my late father's cousin, farmed the adjoining lot, corn, tomatoes, a small orchard he'd tended since before the subdivision existed. Karen Whitfield chaired the Homeowners Association board, a woman who treated bylaws like scripture and neighbors like subjects. She drove a white Cadillac with a vanity plate reading Boss HOA and wore that title like a crown. At first, the rules seemed harmless. Mow your lawn, paint within approved colors, keep trash cans out of sight. Then Karen decided Timothy's orchard violated aesthetic uniformity, a clause she'd quietly inserted into the covenant herself. "Farm animals and crop rows have no place here," she announced at a meeting, glaring at Timothy like he'd committed a crime. Timothy stood his ground calmly. "This land's been growing food since before your subdivision had a name," he said. Karen's smile didn't waver, but her eyes turned cold. "We'll see about that," she replied, and the room went silent. I should have known then that calm would not last, that her smile was armor over something far more vicious. Within a week, Timothy received a certified letter, fines accumulating daily for unauthorized agricultural use of his own deeded property. He laughed it off at first. "She can't fine a man for growing tomatoes," he told me over coffee. But Karen wasn't just petty. She was patient, methodical, and she had connections most residents never suspected existed. Her husband, it turned out, sat on the county zoning board, a fact she mentioned only when it suited her. Small mowing violations against other neighbors turned into stern warnings. Against Timothy, they turned into stacks of citations. I started noticing the pattern. Anyone who challenged Karen paid double, while her allies skated by with warnings and winks. My own trash cans, left out 10 minutes past the rule, earned me a $50 fine and a photograph taped to my door. "Just following the bylaws," Karen said sweetly when I confronted her, though I'd seen her allies leave cans out for hours. That was my first real taste of her hypocrisy. Rules were weapons, applied only to whoever she'd decided to punish. Timothy, stubborn as his crops, kept farming anyway, refusing to let a woman with a clipboard uproot his family's legacy. Karen escalated. She petitioned the board to impose a lien on his property, threatening foreclosure over unpaid violations. I watched him age years and weeks, worry lines deepening as letters piled on his kitchen table like fallen leaves. "I've farmed this dirt my whole life," he told me, voice cracking. "She wants to bury me under paperwork instead." That night I started something quietly. A folder, a timeline, every citation, every inconsistency, every whispered rumor. I didn't know yet it would become evidence in a federal courtroom, but instinct told me to document everything. Karen, meanwhile, grew bolder, hosting community safety meetings where she painted Timothy as a hazard, a nuisance, a threat. She claimed his chickens attracted rats, his tractor damaged shared roads, his irrigation stole water from common areas. All lies. Neighbors who knew better stayed quiet, afraid of becoming her next target, afraid of fines they couldn't afford. I wasn't afraid. I was angry, and anger, properly channeled, becomes the fuel for something far more dangerous to tyrants: strategy. I began attending every board meeting, recording audio, requesting official minutes, building a paper trail Karen couldn't erase. She noticed. Of course she noticed. "You're awfully interested in HOA business for someone with no violations," she sneered. "Just a concerned resident," I said, smiling the same practiced smile she wore, and for once hers faltered. That small crack in her composure told me something important. Underneath the tyranny was fear of being truly seen. Fear of exposure. Fear that someone, somewhere, might finally hold up a mirror to everything she'd built on lies. I decided I would be that mirror, whatever it cost, however long it took, however dangerous she made herself. The lien against Timothy's land moved forward. A foreclosure notice arrived. My phone rang at midnight, his voice hollow, defeated. "They're taking the farm, Danny. 40 years of my life, gone because some woman didn't like my tomato rose." I told him to hold on, that I was building something, that tyrants like Karen always leave a trail of paper corpses. The next morning, I drove to the county records office and requested every HOA filing, every amendment, every signature. What I found made my blood run cold. The agricultural use bylaw Karen cited had been added after Timothy bought his land. Retroactive enforcement. Illegal under state property law. She'd invented a rule and applied it backward to destroy him. I photographed the original covenant, dated years before Timothy's purchase, containing no such restriction whatsoever. My hands trembled as I realized this single document could unravel everything Karen had built her power upon. But documents alone wouldn't save Timothy fast enough. The foreclosure clock was ticking, weeks, not months, remaining. I hired an attorney, Sarah Kwan, who specialized in HOA abuse cases and had beaten boards like Karen's before. "This is textbook selective enforcement," Sarah said, flipping through my folder. "But we need more than one violation." So I widened the net, interviewing neighbors quietly, promising confidentiality, collecting testimony one frightened whisper at a time. An elderly widow admitted Karen had waived her fines in exchange for a public endorsement at the last election. A young couple confessed Karen offered to overlook their unapproved fence if they voted against Timothy's appeal. Piece by piece, a pattern emerged. Karen ran the HOA not as a board, but as a personal fiefdom of favors and punishments. Then came the twist I never expected. Karen's own son, Brandon, reached out to me in secret one evening. "My mom's out of control," he admitted, guilt heavy in his voice. "She's been forging board votes for years." Forged votes. My folder had just doubled in weight, and Karen's carefully built empire had just cracked its foundation. Brandon handed me copies of meeting minutes showing votes that never actually happened, signatures scrawled without real meetings. "Why are you helping me?" I asked him, stunned by this sudden crack in the wall surrounding Karen's cruelty. "Because she did this to my dad's business too, before the divorce," Brandon said quietly. "I watched her break people." That confession chilled me. Karen's cruelty wasn't new, wasn't isolated to Timothy. It was a pattern stretching back years. Meanwhile, the foreclosure hearing date arrived faster than we'd hoped for, faster than Sarah's motions could delay it. We filed an emergency injunction citing retroactive bylaw application and forged board records. A judge agreed to hear it. Karen showed up to court in a tailored suit, radiating confidence, certain her connections would shield her once again. "This is a simple property dispute," her lawyer argued. "The homeowner failed to comply with community standards." Sarah stood, calm as still water, and placed the original, unamended covenant directly onto the judge's desk. "Your Honor, this rule didn't exist when my client purchased his land. It was fabricated after the fact." Karen's smile finally cracked, just slightly, just enough for me to see the fear she'd hidden for months. The judge granted a temporary restraining order, halting the foreclosure, giving Timothy breathing room for the first time in weeks. Karen wasn't finished. Outside the courthouse, she cornered me. "You think this is over? I own this neighborhood." "You don't own the law," I said, and walked away before she could see how badly my hands were shaking. That night, someone slashed Timothy's tractor tires and spray-painted a slur across his barn door. No proof, but everyone suspected her. I installed cameras around his property that week, determined that whatever came next would be documented in high definition. Karen escalated her public campaign, printing flyers calling Timothy a danger to community values, distributing them door to door. Neighbors who'd stayed silent began whispering support instead. emboldened by seeing someone finally stand against her. A local news reporter, tipped off by an anonymous email, one I later admitted sending myself, requested an interview. Small HOA, big power trip. The headline read, and Karen's face on the evening news was not a flattering one. She doubled down instead of backing off, hosting an emergency meeting to formally expel Timothy from the community. I attended with my recorder running, watching her orchestrate votes among board members clearly terrified of crossing her. All in favor of removing this troublemaker's HOA privileges, she announced, and hands rose like she'd rehearsed them. But then Brandon stood up in front of the entire room and asked to see the actual voting records from prior years. Karen's face went white. "Sit down, Brandon. This isn't the place," she hissed, but he didn't sit down. "Mom, tell them about the forged signatures," he said, voice shaking but steady, cutting through her decades of control. Gasps rippled through the room. This was the twist nobody saw coming. Her own son turning the room against her. Karen tried to laugh it off. "He's confused, emotional. This is a family matter," she said, but nobody believed her anymore. I stood and handed copies of the original bylaws to every resident in the room, proof of her fabrication laid bare. The meeting dissolved into chaos, board members resigning on the spot, refusing to be complicit any longer. Karen stormed out, Cadillac tires screeching, but I knew this wasn't retreat. It was regrouping for something worse. That something worse arrived 3 days later, when armed HOA contracted security showed up at Timothy's property line. They claimed his fence encroached on common area, an area that had never existed until Karen redrew the plat maps. Timothy refused to move, standing on land his family had legally owned for generations, calm despite their aggression. One guard grabbed his arm. Timothy pulled back, instinct, not resistance, and that's when they threw him to the ground. I arrived moments later, camera already recording, capturing the cuffs, the shouting, Karen's smug satisfaction from her porch. "That's what happens when you don't respect this board," she said. The exact words that opened this story. I didn't just film it. I live-streamed it, watched in real time by hundreds of horrified strangers across the country. By morning, the video had 1 million views, comments flooding in, outrage spreading faster than Karen could control. Local police, embarrassed by the viral footage, released Timothy without charges, calling the arrest procedurally questionable. Karen's private security contractors had used excessive force against an unarmed 60-year-old farmer on his own land. That was the moment I stopped thinking small and started planning the biggest move of this entire fight. Federal court. Sarah agreed instantly. Excessive force, forged records, selective enforcement. This isn't just an HOA dispute anymore, Daniel. We filed a federal civil rights lawsuit, naming Karen Whitfield, the HOA board, and the private security firm as defendants. Karen hired a bigger law firm, flew in from the city, confidence radiating from every tailored thread of their suits. "This will be dismissed within weeks," her new lawyer told reporters, but I noticed Karen herself said nothing at all. Discovery began, and with it came the twist that shattered whatever remained of Karen's public image entirely. Emails surfaced showing Karen had personally instructed security to make an example of Timothy before the confrontation occurred. Written proof of premeditated intimidation, time-stamped days before the assault, undeniable and devastating in a courtroom. Her own attorney reportedly begged her to settle quietly, but Karen, arrogant to the end, refused every offer. "I built this community," she told a reporter outside her mansion-sized house. "I won't let outsiders destroy it." Meanwhile, more victims came forward. A black family fined for loud gatherings that were simply birthday parties. A disabled veteran denied a wheelchair ramp permit for aesthetic violations, forced to crawl up his own front steps. Each new testimony added another charge, another witness, another crack in the foundation Karen had built on fear. The lawsuit expanded into a class action, dozens of residents joining, finally unafraid to speak against her tyranny. Karen's husband, embarrassed by the scandal reaching the zoning board, quietly filed for divorce mid-litigation. Brandon testified against his own mother in a sworn deposition, describing years of manipulation disguised as leadership. "She taught me power means never apologizing," he said. "I don't want to be like her anymore." I watched Karen's face during that deposition video. For the first time, genuine panic instead of practiced composure. She tried one last maneuver, bribing a former board secretary to testify the bylaw amendment predated Timothy's purchase. But the secretary, guilt-ridden, secretly recorded Karen offering the bribe and handed the recording straight to our attorneys. That recording became Exhibit A, proof not just of past fraud, but active obstruction of a federal case. The federal judge, reviewing the mounting evidence, expanded the case to include witness tampering and civil rights violations. Karen's legal team quietly withdrew, unwilling to attach their reputation to a client actively committing new crimes. She hired a third lawyer, cheaper, desperate, someone willing to defend a sinking ship for one final payday. Meanwhile, Timothy's health suffered under the stress. A mild heart scare landed him briefly in the hospital. Sitting by his bed, I promised him this fight wasn't just about his land anymore. It was about justice itself. "I never wanted to be famous," he said weakly. "I just wanted to grow my tomatoes in peace." That simple wish, denied by one woman's cruelty, had become a nationwide symbol of HOA overreach and abuse. Reporters camped outside Willow Creek Estates, drones filmed Karen's mansion, cable news debated HOA reform on primetime. Karen tried hiding from cameras, but her own neighbors, once silent, now happily pointed reporters toward her house. The tide had fully turned. The woman who once ruled through fear now lived surrounded by public contempt. Then came a twist even I hadn't anticipated. Federal investigators found Karen had embezzled HOA dues for personal luxury. Vacation homes, a boat, designer handbags, all funded quietly through inflated maintenance fees, charged to residents for years. Fraud charges layered atop civil rights violations, transforming a property dispute into a sprawling criminal indictment. Karen's mugshot, released to the press, replaced her polished PR photos across every news outlet within hours. I felt something unexpected watching that photo circulate. Not joy exactly, but a heavy, exhausted sense of relief. Months of depositions, evidence hearings, and legal maneuvering finally culminated in a trial date set for early spring. Karen arrived at the federal courthouse alone. No husband, no allies, no board members willing to sit beside her. Brandon sat with us instead, in the gallery, watching his mother face consequences he'd helped bring into daylight. The prosecution laid out the timeline meticulously. The retroactive bylaw, the forged votes, the assault, the embezzlement, the bribery. Sarah's closing argument was simple and devastating. Power without accountability becomes cruelty. This defendant proved that daily. Karen's lawyer offered a weak defense. She'd misunderstood the bylaws, delegated the security decisions, trusted the wrong people. Nobody believed it. Not the jury, not the reporters, not the neighbors filling every seat in the courtroom. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Karen's face had lost every trace of its old arrogance. Guilty on federal civil rights violations. Guilty on witness tampering. Guilty on wire fraud. Guilty on embezzlement. The courtroom erupted, not in shouting, but in something quieter and heavier. Years of suppressed relief finally released. Karen sat frozen, the color drained from her face, staring at the verdict sheet like it was written in a language she refused to learn. Sentencing came weeks later. Restitution to every defrauded homeowner. A permanent ban from serving on any HOA board nationwide. 3 years in federal prison for wire fraud and witness tampering, plus a separate civil judgment awarding Timothy his farm free and clear. The lien was dissolved, the foreclosure erased. His land, his tomatoes, his 40 years of work, finally safe under the law's protection. Karen's mansion went up for auction to cover restitution payments. The same neighbors she'd fined for petty violations now bidding on her furniture. I stood outside the courthouse with Timothy as reporters shouted questions, and for once, he answered them himself, chin held high. "I just wanted to farm my land in peace," he said. Turns out peace sometimes has to be won in a courtroom. Brandon approached us quietly afterward, apologizing for his mother's cruelty, thanking us for giving him the courage to finally speak. You didn't cause this, I told him. She did. You just refused to keep covering for it. The class action settlement paid out to dozens of residents Karen had bullied over the years, small justice for years of quiet suffering. The disabled veteran finally got his ramp built, funded in part by Karen's forfeited assets. A bitter but fitting irony. Willow Creek Estates dissolved its old board entirely, replacing it with resident elected members bound by transparent, recorded votes. New bylaws explicitly banned retroactive rule enforcement and required independent audits of HOA finances every single year. I helped draft those new rules myself, determined that no future Karen could ever again turn a clipboard into a weapon. Timothy replanted his orchard that spring, insisting I help him pick the first tomatoes, laughing for the first time in months. Best crop I've grown in years, he said, though I suspected it was really just the taste of finally winning. My daughter Mia grew up hearing this story, learning that quiet, careful persistence can topple even the loudest tyranny. I kept the folder that started it all, citations, covenants, recordings, a reminder that evidence outlasts arrogance every time. Karen wrote me one letter from prison, no apology inside, only bitterness that outsiders never understood how hard leadership really is. I didn't write back. Some people never learn the lesson their downfall was meant to teach them. The lawsuit's legacy spread further than Willow Creek. State legislators cited our case while drafting new HOA oversight laws. Reporters called it the case that finally gave homeowners teeth against boards who forgot they served, not ruled. I still farm beside Timothy some weekends. No cameras, no lawyers, just dirt under our nails and quiet, hard-won peace. Justice didn't erase the fear those months cost us. The sleepless nights, the hospital visit, the slashed tires and painted slurs. But it proved something worth every sacrifice. Even the smallest voice, armed with truth, can outlast the loudest tyrant. Karen Whitfield is eligible for parole in 2 years. She will never chair another board, never wear that crown again. Timothy's land still grows corn every summer, his fences standing exactly where they always should have stood. And every time I drive past her old mansion, now home to a young family who mows their lawn on their own schedule, I smile. Some victories cost more than they should. Ours cost months of fear, a friend's health, and a family's trust broken beyond repair. But the harvest that followed, justice, freedom, and a farmer's peace restored, made every single cost worth paying.